All right, so now we're moving into the chapter where we really get into talking about designing studies and how to create good and proper studies, how to get samples, and how to do surveys properly to eliminate any type of bias or anything like that. So this is Keeper 4.1, Samples and Surveys. All right, so again, and we've seen this before, what our goal is, or our goal in statistics is to figure out something about a population. So we have some idea in mind and we're trying to figure it out about this population. Now, most times, 9 times out of 10, you cannot gather information from the entire population. So your goal is to get a sample of that population and collect data from that sample, and then use that sample to draw conclusions about the population as a whole. So again, we start with our population, we identify who that's going to be. Then we make a little sample out of the population, collect data from that sample so that we can make inference on the population. Alright, so in this Keeper, we're really focused on the sample and how we actually make the sample. Alright, because again, you want to make the sample strategically. You don't want to just pick any old body. You want to make the samples in a way that, you know, is fair to everybody and everyone has equal chance of being chosen and other aspects like that. Alright, so you have several different types of samples. The first type of sample that we're going to talk about is our convenience sample. A convenience sample is just what it sounds like. It's convenient. It's convenient to the researcher. Whoever was given the sample did it in such a way, or surveyed the people in such a way that it was convenient to them. They surveyed them because they were easy to be accessed. They surveyed those people because they were in your class, or you know, you're walking down Cobb Parkway and you surveyed every person that you saw. That's convenience. All right, and that's not really a good sampling method to use because it produces a lot of bias, but it is a method and some people do use it. Now if we do a study, 9 times out of 10, if we ended up doing a study at, you know, for our class or our maybe seniors at Allerton High School, you might have to do convenience based on your situation. All right, but as much as possible, you want to get away from doing a convenient sample. Alright, so the next type of sample is your voluntary sample. A voluntary sample, again, is just what it sounds like. People are volunteering themselves to be part of the sample or the study. Alright, so a lot of times you see this with mail-out surveys. I've even seen it at the mall, like you're walking on the mall and somebody asks you to stop and answer a couple questions. Call-in surveys, all those types of things are voluntary surveys. Now what you need to understand, a voluntary survey is not necessarily a good thing, because 9 times out of 10 the people that do the voluntary surveys are the ones that have a vested interest in whatever the survey is about. Alright, so again, a voluntary sample or voluntary survey is not really the best method of collecting a sample. Alright, so here's our good methods. These are the ones that we want to really focus on, because these are the ones that will produce a very good representation of the population. So the first one is a simple random sample. We use that so much that we abbreviate that as SRS. So a simple random sample is a sample of size n that contains people from the population, but the key to it is that every person had an equal chance of being picked. Alright, so it's not like I had a higher chance than you. Every person has the same chance of being picked from that population. So if you look at our little picture here, we have all of our green happy faces. That's our population. And we did a simple random sample. We randomly picked these blue figures out of the population. The easiest way to do it, and I know people take this for granted a lot, but the easiest way is just to pick names out of a hat. I mean, if your population is small enough, like say my population was my second block AP Stat class, well, my population is small enough that if I wanted to sample from that population, I could just pick names out of a hat. Maybe I want a sample size of 5, I would just pick 5 names out of a hat. Another way is to use a random digit table, and I'll show you guys what that looks like in class, but that's actually in the back of your textbook. You'll see it says random digits tables with all the rest of the other tables. And then the last way that's really, really easy to get a simple random sample is use a random number generator, which is randint on your calculator, RANDINT on your calculator. And again, I'll show you guys how to use all that in class. Alright, so the next one is a stratified random sample. Stratified, basically what you're doing is you're splitting your stuff up, your population up into strata or groups. Now what you need to understand is those strata or those groups are all the same. So for instance, this would be a strata of all red people. This is a strata of all white people, and this is a strata of all green people. Alright, so out of those strata, I'm going to pick a couple people from each one. So I'm going to pick a couple red here. I'm going to do a simple random sample to get those. I'm going to pick a couple here using a simple random sample. Maybe I'm pulling out of a hat or something like that. And I'm going to pick a couple here to get a simple random sample. So again, I split them up into groups. Those groups, you know, they're different. The groups themselves are different, but within the group, the individuals are the same. And then I'm picking a simple random sample from within each group. That way I'm guaranteed to get a couple red, a couple of white, and a couple of green. Alright, the other way, just doing a simple random sample, I could have randomly picked some names out of the hat and they could have all been red, and that could be a problem. So again, if I want to make sure I'm getting some red, some white, and some green, I want to make sure I stratify it first. So that's a stratified random sample. Now the next one is a cluster sample, which is very, very similar to strata or stratified sample because you're breaking it up into groups. So again, in a cluster sample, I'm breaking it up into groups. The difference between the two is that in your cluster sample, the groups look like the population. So this cluster looks all like the green population that we started with. This cluster looks like the green population. All these little clusters look like the green population. So basically, once I split them up into clusters, then I do a simple random sample and choose the entire cluster. So I did a simple random sample and I picked this entire cluster to be my sample. Alright, now we have systematic sampling. I believe this is the last one. Systematic sampling is sampling with a rule. So for instance, if I list everyone at Allatoona, maybe in alphabetical order, and I say I'm going to pick every 5th person or every 4th person, it's whenever you say I'm going to pick every nth element or nth person, nth individual, that's what's making it a systematic sampling. Alright, so again, let's recap. Your convenience samples and your voluntary samples are pretty much not good samples. You don't want to really use that because they don't represent the entire population quite often. For instance, if I wanted to do a sample or a survey on seniors at Allatoona High School, if I only sampled the seniors that I teach, well then I'm missing a whole population of seniors that don't take pre-calculus or that don't take AP statistics. So again, you want to be careful with those convenience samples and those voluntary samples. Alright, you want to make sure that you're not creating bias in the way that you're sampling. And bias is basically favoring a certain outcome. Like for instance, I want to ask people how they feel about Barack Obama being president. Well, if I only ask black people, I'm favoring a certain outcome. I'm hoping that they would say, oh, he's, a great president or something like that. That's creating bias in my study. Alright, so why should we rely on random sampling? Basically, we want to eliminate bias. Alright, so your goal is to eliminate as much bias as possible. And not only that, when we get to probability, which is next unit, a lot of our probability is based off of the fact that we have a random sample and that there's no bias in our sample. Alright, so what can go wrong in these studies? You can do everything right and you can try to get a random sample and you can do all this good stuff, but sometimes other things could actually happen. So the first thing that we see quite often is what we call undercoverage, and this is basically when a certain group is left out of your sample because of how you sampled. So for instance, you might have done you might have done a simple random sample, which we know is a good thing. That's a good way to sample. But maybe I did it during the day at 11 o'clock. Well, I'm leaving out all the working people, right? Because they're at work and I couldn't reach them. I couldn't reach them to sample them. So that's undercoverage because I left out a certain population of people or a certain sample of people. Non-response. is basically when like whoever you're trying to reach for the sample, they can't be contacted. So for instance, or maybe they refuse to participate. So for instance, you guys know how sometimes you're sitting at home and those people call your house and they want to ask you questions and you're like, yeah, not now, and hang up the phone on them. That would be like a refusal to participate. That's a non-response. Or maybe your phone was off when they called you or something like that for your survey. So any of those would be non-response. And then wording of the question is a big way to kind of have bias in your survey or your sample. You can word a question such that it influences a particular response. So you can word something to make people feel like, I don't know why this keeps popping up. You can word it so that people answer it the way that you want to answer it. And so that could also be a problem with your study, wording of your question. And that's it.